We're at the Seattle Aquarium, where in a moment we will hear from members of Governor Jay Inslee's Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force on the bills making their way through the state legislature right now to try to save them. But this is Diver Kim. She is on the other side of the glass at the window on Washington Waters here at the Seattle Aquarium. And if you stick around to the end of the video, there'll be more with her too. This is Dr. Deborah Giles, who is, I'll say, a killer whale expert, but you have two, I'll say, hellacious titles. Would you tell me what they are?
Sure. I'm the Science and Research Director for the nonprofit called Wild Orca, and I'm a killer whale field biologist for University of Washington Center for Conservation Biology.
Okay, so as an expert, then you know very well what is going on in these bills is critical to saving the population. What is it about these you think is best to help save these orcas?
What I like about these bills is that it covers a suite of threats to the whales. So each of the identified threats, lack of quality and quantity prey, toxins, toxicants, so pollution, and then also vessel presence and associated noise. Those were the three main identified threats in the Killer Whale Recovery Plan in 2008. We are also focusing on the potential for oil spill and wanting to lessen the potential for a catastrophic spill. So all four of the bills moving through the legislature right now address each of those threats. And I really like it that they're going through together because it is a holistic approach to starting to get a handle on recovering this population of killer whales.
So you just said it's starting to get a handle. Is there more that needs to be done beyond this? Because this is they're pretty comprehensive, but there's obviously some pieces missing.
Yeah, so one of the things, there are a couple of things that we didn't get to, so I'm also, in addition to the other two, I'm also, I was appointed to the prey work group and the vessels work group for the governor's task force. And in those work groups, there were so many things, so many great ideas that we had. And the fact of the matter is that we just had to punt some of them to year two. And so some of the things that we punted were things like noise related to Navy activity, both in the water and in the air. Also fisheries issues, so related to harvest and hatchery, for example. We didn't have an opportunity, or we just chose, because those are such big issues, we chose to punt that to year two. And so one of the things that I'm really focused on and really passionate about is going back and talking with the Pacific Salmon Commission and really getting the southern resident killer whales to be identified as a major stakeholder in all negotiations regarding fisheries management. So right now the whales do not factor in as a stakeholder when we're divvying up the amount of fish that are available to be caught or that get to escape to spawn. The southern residents aren't factored in there like tribes are or commercial or recreational fisher folk are. And that really needs to change. The whales are the original harvesters of this Chinook salmon throughout the Pacific Northwest, and their needs are not being met. It's not okay, it's not enough just to include them in the natural mortality kind of black box figure that they use when they're coming up with fisheries management decisions. And so that's something that Wild Orca and a number of other organizations, fish and whale-related organizations, are really getting interested in and pushing for.
So I want to take these things a couple at a time, because I know from my limited study and research that even with the toxic chemicals, if there's enough food, those whales can at least survive and their bodies can deal with the chemicals. What can we do what do you think we should be doing to increase that Chinook population?
I personally think we need to be looking at where and how and when we fish from Southeast Alaska to Monterey. The southern residents don't go up to Southeast Alaska very much, but they have been identified up there at least one time. But ultimately, we're talking about a wide-ranging, large-bodied, long-lived mammal that moves around its habitat. And the fact that we're doing the kinds of fishing that we're doing off the coasts of Alaska, BC, Canada, and the lower states here, it's too indiscriminate. There's no way to know what age class you're getting or what run you're getting. And so getting a handle on how and when and where we are fishing, I think, is going to be critically important for recovering the southern residents. And then again, as I said, factoring them in as a major stakeholder along with the other currently recognized stakeholders, I think, is really critically important.
So the other thing I keep thinking about is the noise factor, and I think there are still a lot of people who ask, well, why is it a problem if I take a whale watching plane overhead or a boat out there, or if a cargo ship goes by?
Noise is a factor. What I have said in the past, based on some acoustics data that we've looked at, if you can see a large ship, it's potentially loud enough to mask the whale's ability to echolocate and find their food. So the fact that we have large ships moving in and out of the southern residents' critical habitat in the U.S. and Canada, and that number increasing, that does not bode well for the southern residents. One of the things that's happening is we have a current project where we're attaching suction cups to the whales, and we record the acoustic environment. That's a project of NOAA, the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. Those researchers are the leads on that, and that's a really amazing study because we're trying to attach those tags this time where they stay on overnight. And one of the ideas that we've thought about is that if they're foraging more during the daytime, which old data from critter cams show that they are foraging more during the daytime, it's possible that as a mitigation measure we could move some more of this shipping to the evening or nighttime hours when the whales are potentially maybe not foraging quite so much, in order to give them as much daylight as possible. Because the idea is that it's possible that they're using their eyes at the very end of that capture, foraging and capture moment. And so this study that's occurring right now, and it's funded for the next 3 years, is trying to get at that question. So I think limiting the amount of noise around the whales in whatever way, in every way that we can, is going to be important going forward.
What's ahead for you in terms of field research?
So since 2009, I've been the vessel captain on the Orca Scat project, which is a project Dr. Sam Wasser from the University of Washington is the lead on that. We are potentially we will be out there. Right now we are underfunded for the 2019 season, but ultimately that project is amazing because we can collect fecal samples from a long distance non-invasively using trained detection dogs. And so a dog on the front of our boat can sniff a killer whale feces from a nautical mile away. We can collect that sample and analyze it for hormones that help us address and answer questions related to all three of the main identified threats. And again, non-invasively collected samples. And so that's the biggest thing for going into 2019 field season, is collecting as much fecal samples as possible in order to understand what's happening in the inside of the whales.
So just to paint a picture, how urgent is this in terms of their survival?
So I think it's critically important. The mammal-eating killer whales that occur in the same water are regularly and healthily reproducing calves every 3 to 5 years, which is what we would expect from a killer whale. They're able to do that because they have ample food throughout the year. So the toxins that they're ingesting, while more, because they're eating higher on the food chain, are not as much of an issue, or really at all, for a well-fed animal. It's kind of like the only reason to get fat and stay fat. Unfortunately, the southern resident fish-eating killer whales don't have that luxury. They're experiencing what I call famine and deeper famine. And so what we see is high levels, up to 70% pregnancy loss with the southern residents, and that is tied back to the lack of food. Really critically important is to quiet the waters around them as much as possible, get a handle on as much toxicants going into the system as possible, and clean up those known sources and start to get a handle on non-point source toxins, and really trying to address the fact that the whales don't have enough fish out there throughout their entire range. Those are the things that we humans really need to be focusing on, all of those, not just one of them, but all of them, including habitat protection and restoration, in order to recover this population of animals that we've done almost everything possible to doom.
Absolutely. So what's your sense? I know one of these bills barely passed out of the Senate. What's your sense that they're going to make their way to the governor's desk, where we're pretty sure they'll be signed?
Right. I'm hopeful, actually. The way that politics works and bills generally work, I'm fairly new to this, but having watched it from more of a bystander and not somebody that's trying to help educate legislators and the public, I'm actually pretty hopeful that they're going to, or I guess I should say, how do I want to say it? It could have been a lot worse. The bills could have been changed a lot more than they were. And so if we get this suite of bills passed through and signed by the governor and fully funded, that's going to be a great first step to recovering this ecosystem, protecting what's left, recovering what needs to be recovered for the salmon, the forage fish, and the killer whales, and ultimately humans.
And then it's on to year 2 for the other stuff.
And then it's on to year 2.
All right, very good. Dr. Deborah Giles, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, this is Brendan Flynn, who's been part of a fishing family for his entire life, but he was telling me not really enough to make a living on it. And I want to talk to you a little more because we'll hear about what you were saying about it. You seeing a major change in the sound. Talk a little bit about, with your firsthand experience out in the water all the time, what you've seen, the way the sound has changed.
Well, some of the major changes have been, most notable for me as a child was that there were all of a sudden some coho runs that a few years prior we'd always seen in early September come through the islands, and just one year they ceased to exist. And you'll see a few fish that time of year, coho, but we used to get about 25% of our catch in early September on our reef net here were these big, beautiful coho. And you just don't see them anymore. We used to consistently see bait balls in the channel between Lopez and Shaw where we fish. You'd see multiple balls at a time, most flood tides. And now you may see one, but there's far less bait. There's far less kelp. Around the mid-90s, there were some big El Nino events, and at that point we saw a real serious lessening of both the kelp and the bait fish, and that's kind of had a deleterious effect on the whole ecosystem because juvenile fish rear in the kelp, and then without the herring at the base of the food chain. Above copeplots feed the herring and juvenile salmon. You see significantly less birds. When I was a child in Lopez Sound, between Lopez and Decatur Island, there would be flocks of thousands of western grebes and out in the spring, and now if you go out there, you're lucky to see a dozen grebes. There's just a lot of things that I remember from my childhood that in a few short decades just don't exist anymore. And so, I was really serious when I was saying I think this is our last best chance at making a change in the health of the Salish Sea with this package of legislation that has been recommended by the Southern Pacific Killer Whale Task Force. Because over the years there have been a lot of great ideas put forth to try to turn things around, but nobody ever has the will to find the funding. I understand that nobody wants to pay more taxes, but we owe the wealth of the Puget Sound to the ecosystem here. I mean, it's what built this place. If you look at the trees, they have marine nitrogen in them. I mean, the salmon are the conveyor belt of nutrients from the sea to the land, and for all intents and purposes, that conveyor belt is broken. We don't have the kind of biomass we need to maintain that in. And so, we have a system that is slowly sputtering today. To what end, I don't know, but yeah, I just really hope we can do something here to make a positive difference, because it's been just a downward trend line.
And without, of course, the system being at full functionality, that means fewer Chinook, which means the orcas don't have anything to eat.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's the thing. I mean, the orca is this amazing emblematic species, and I feel very thankful that everyone cares so much for the orca. But if we don't have a functional ecosystem, nothing survives here. The orca's at the top of it. We need a functional ecosystem.
Well, I mean, I know it's a whole slew of things, but I can't help thinking the chemicals in the water are probably one of the biggest problems.
When these orcas die and wash up on the beach, a lot of them have had to be disposed of as toxic waste because they are so full of contaminants, PCBs, PVDs, industrial pollutants that have now been banned, but they're still in the system. And they have very long half-lives. They're going to be around for decades. And so the only way that we can keep the orcas healthy is by improving the ecosystem, creating more salmon, because if they have enough food, they will be healthy, even with the toxics in their systems. They see with the transient killer whales that they eat seals and sea lions, porpoises, seamounts. They have much higher levels of contaminants in their blubber, but they're healthy and they're consistently having calves because they never lose weight. They never go into a food deficit. And so the orcas, these resident orcas, going into a food deficit where they access their fat reserves and they start to metabolize these contaminants, that's really having a huge effect on them.
Wow.
So,
I know there are a whole slew of things that these bills will do. Are there one or two things that you think might be most effective in terms of not only helping the orcas, but helping the greater Salish Sea?
Well, like I was saying before, I really hope that the legislature doesn't pick and choose through these bills and just fund one or two. We need all of these equally. We need to address the toxic, we need to address the vessels, the oil, and the habitat. It really, people always ask me, what's the biggest problem here? And I always just say it's a death by 1,000 cuts. That's pretty much it. I mean, yes, and one oil spill could end it all tomorrow. And so, yeah, that is extremely important, but if we don't have a functional ecosystem to protect from an oil spill, then what's the point of all of this?
All right, Brendan, thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Bob Davidson. I'm the President and CEO of the Seattle Aquarium. We're delighted to have you here this morning, and thanks for joining us here in Puget Sound Hall. The Seattle Aquarium's mission is inspiring conservation of our marine environment. That's exactly why we're strongly supporting the full package of Orca emergency response bills in Olympia, and we're highlighting these for you today. As we gather, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're currently on the grounds of the Coast Salish people and who have stewarded these lands and waters for generations in the past. Today, we're all working together for the future of our one world ocean and the surrounding communities. Our future, the future of the southern resident orcas, and the future of the Salish Sea are inextricably linked. Thank you to the Governor for forming the Orca Task Force, and to the working group and task force members for your hard work in developing the recommendations that served as the foundation for the bills that we'll hear about today. We're glad to see several of you here today. We also appreciate the leadership of the legislators who are sponsoring these vital steps in the legislative session in Olympia. It's clear that we must act with urgency and impact. We must come together this legislative session and put in place the recommended measures that will give our endangered southern resident orcas a real chance at recovery. We must also ensure that the funding is in place in the state budget to turn these into on-the-ground and on-the-water action. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Deborah Giles, research scientist with the University of Washington and the Science and Research Director for the local nonprofit Wild Orca. Dr. Giles.
Hi, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I've been honored for the last year to be a member of both the work group for vessels as well as the prey work group on the governor's task force. So it's really exciting to see how far we've come with these bills. I've been studying the southern resident killer whale since 2005, but I actually fell in love with them more than 3 decades ago, amazingly, when I saw them off the west side of San Juan Island. We didn't know they were suffering at that point, but it's become abundantly clear to everybody, even around the world, that these whales need help. A multi-year study of the nutritional and physiological and reproductive health of the southern residents, led by Sam Wasser and his team, including myself, found that nearly 70% of all pregnancies in this population are lost before the calf is born viable. There are many, many things that are limiting the growth of this population, from vessel presence and associated noise, toxic pollution going into and staying in the marine environment, the risk of oil spills, and the lack of quality and quantity prey for this population of animals. We are at a critical juncture in the state legislative process with 4 very important bills making their way through the legislature. All of these bills are critical to the southern resident killer whale protection and recovery, but we also need to pass the budgets that will fully support these bills. We need to find the money to support and really get going all shovel-ready projects that will protect and restore habitats critical to the entire food web of the southern residents. The toxics bill will help protect the health of humans, salmon, and the whales by keeping toxic chemicals out of the environment. And we need to fully fund DFW enforcement of new regulations in the vessel noise and disturbance bill to ensure that the whales have the space and the quiet they need to successfully forage for the few fish that are out there. With the 30th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez spill just recently passed on the 24th of March, we're reminded of the devastating impacts of a spill, and we simply cannot afford to risk that in this ecosystem. The toxics bill would lessen the impact, or lessen the potential for a catastrophic spill like that, which would really wipe out the whales and this ecosystem. We also really need to fund and support the process that brings together stakeholders and tribes to discuss the potential for the Snake River Dam removals to increase Chinook salmon. Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions about the science or research that's currently occurring with the whales. And we really need to get behind those bills getting passed. So contact your legislators, legislative aides, and let's make it happen. Thank you.
Hey, I want to thank everybody for coming today. My name is Brendan Flynn. I grew up reef netting in the San Juan Islands and still do. I also gill net in Puget Sound in the fall. I was on a reef net boat when I was under a year old and started curling, well, probably when I was in my early teens. And so over the span of time, I've watched what I would say is just a great lessening in life in Sailor City. I've watched many salmon runs that we used to fish disappear. The bait fish balls that we used to consistently see in the channel between Lucas and Shaw are infrequent at best. And yeah, it's not the same place I remember as a child. And I guess over the years, there have been, I guess what I've seen is there have been a lot of people with a lot of really good ideas at fixing some of these problems. But when it comes down to it, we've never had the political will to find the funding to push these projects forward. And so I'd say this really is the first time that I've ever seen a really solid chance to look at this problem in a holistic way, because we have issues with toxics. The vessel noise is an issue for the orcas, we know that. The threat of an oil spill in Puget Sound is unthinkable. This is not a pristine environment. Prince William Sound was, and it still struggles. If we spill oil here, it is absolutely game over. I participated in the Islands Oil Spill Association for over 20 years, and we're the first line of defense in the San Juan Islands. We're just a small group of volunteers with a few pieces of 1,000 feet of boom here, 1,000 feet of boom there. All we can do is guard one bay. Saving one bay doesn't matter when you lose the whole ecosystem. And so I really hope that we can get these, the oil spill funded, because, you know, I for years watched ATVs, articulated tug and barges, travel through the straits with no escort, while you have tankers traveling with an escort. It's never made any sense. But yeah, I guess basically this entire package, I'm really hopeful that it gets funded. I hope the legislators can find a way to find the funding for this, because if we just pick and choose certain pieces of this, it's not going to have nearly the impact that it would as a whole. I want to thank everybody that's served on the task force over the last year developing these recommendations for these bills. And I just really hope that the legislature can find a way to push these things through, because I honestly feel like if we don't do something now, we're not going to have much left in 10 or 15 years.
Hall, Mayor of the City of Shoreline, and I serve on the Board of Directors of the Association of Washington Cities, representing all 281 cities in the state of Washington. It was my honor to be appointed by Governor Inslee to serve on the Orca Task Force, and I am so impressed with the hard work and dedication of such a diverse group of people over the past year to look for ways to protect and restore the orcas and the ecosystem that they depend on. We learned that there's no single action that can save these orcas on its own. It will take a number of actions by everyone involved to protect and restore this ecosystem. The federal government has a role in the recovery plan. Tribal governments have stepped up to the plate and taken amazing steps to try to protect salmon and orcas. At the local government level, we understand that we have a role as well. In the City of Shoreline, we've improved our stormwater management regulations even beyond what's required by our state permit to make sure that the water that flows through our city is healthy for fish and for whales. We're in the process of doing habitat restoration projects and removing barriers to fish so that the fish can spawn and provide food for the orcas. We're very excited that in June we'll be putting up a new sign at Richmond Beach Saltwater Park, which is on the whale trail, so that people know that they can safely and enjoyably watch the orcas from shore without needing to go out and disturb them on a boat. So local governments are deeply committed to these actions, and right now what's critically important is that the state of Washington steps up with its share, both with the bills to promote restoration and protection and the funding that's required. Thank you.
Washington Environmental Council. And I also serve on the Orca Recovery Task Force along with Will and Brendan and many of you who are here today supporting this effort. Last November, the task force identified 36 actions needed for orca survival and recovery, and that list is long because the need is great. And as you've heard, orcas face tremendous threats. The Environmental Priorities Coalition, which I am representing today, includes 23 leading environmental advocacy groups. And we believe that investing in a healthy and thriving environment benefits communities in every part of the state. Together, we identified Orca emergency response as one of our top priorities for 2019. We have worked with legislators, we have testified in public hearings, we have provided the public with opportunities to weigh into their own senators and representatives as well. And the public right now is demanding action. Today, 4 strong policy bills are alive and they're moving through the legislature. And if enacted, these would set us on a far better path toward habitat protection for salmon and for small fish to increase food for orcas. Reducing vessel noise and disturbance will have an immediate benefit quieting the waters for orcas, while reducing toxics and the threat of oil spills must be ramped up now for long-term recovery as these threats grow every day. The actions in these 4 bills are strongly supported by experts and scientists, organizations that have supported orca recovery for decades, and the public, but we need the legislature to pass all of them. A piecemeal approach will not be enough to help the orcas this year. However, none of these bills is a guarantee, and all face opposition. We are here today to urge the legislature to pass all 4 bills. In addition, we need the legislature to fund programs that implement the needed actions, and we must ensure that natural resource programs are funded sustainably. For more than 10 years now, natural resources programs at the state level have withstood steeper general fund cuts than any other area of state government, even though these programs represent less than 1% of the state general fund and only 2% of the state operating budget. So for our environmental laws to be implemented and enforced, natural resources programs must have secure funding that is stable and predictable now and into the future. So this year, the urgent orca situation underscores the need to fill funding gaps at the Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and sister agencies to maintain and enhance protections. These programs benefit communities across our state. And every $1 million invested in watershed restoration creates 16 to 24 jobs and $2.5 million in total economic benefits. These are win-win projects that create good jobs in urban and in rural communities. They reduce pollution, they improve habitat, and they keep Washington a great place to live, to work, and to play. So let's be clear that today we're talking about what is needed for orcas, but those same actions will help people and communities as well. So more salmon means more salmon for everyone. Less toxic pollution, less toxic pollution for people, and decreasing risk of oil spills to protect our maritime industries. So yes, orcas need all of these, but people need them too. So to close, I just wanted to reflect that we realized that the best time to restore Puget Sound and to protect the orcas was frankly 30 years ago. The second best time is right now. And we absolutely cannot and we should not kick the can further down the road and defer solutions to future generations. So let's act on these today. Thank you. And I understand from Nick, our communications director, that what we will do is all of us will be available for questions. There's also a number of members of the Community Orca Task Force and the Vessel Work Group, as well as the subject matter experts for each of these bills. If media would like to talk about anything in particular, please, Nick, if you could wave your hand. Connect with Nick or ask any of us, and we will be happy to hook you up with the right people. Thank you very much for coming today.
Waters exhibit. My name is Katie. I'm the person standing in front of this great big window with all of you. And for those of you who just arrived, you made it in time for our scuba diver presentation. Thanks for joining us. It looks like we're starting to get pretty full on those benches. There's a few spots left up front on the floor outside of the silver box if anyone wants to try and find a seated area for yourself. And if you are standing, you're welcome to stand behind the benches and over along the windows here. Thanks so much for keeping that aisleway outside of the black stanchions clear for folks who are moving through to the rest of the aquarium. Now, since this is a scuba diver presentation, without further ado, let me introduce our dive buddy. This is Diver Kim. Hi, Kim.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing out there today?
Oh, sounds like we're doing very well. How are things going in there?
It's wonderful in here.
Excellent. Now that is Kim talking to us from underwater, which I think is really cool. Has anybody here talked to a diver underwater before? All right, one or two of us have done this before, but for the rest of us, it is brand new. So Kim, how does that work? How can you talk to us when you're underwater?
Well, if you have the special technology company now, this mask that covers my entire face allows me to breathe and talk at the same time. The air comes into the mask through that yellow line that's running all the way to the surface, and it supplies the air from large tanks of air at the surface.
Wouldn't be a trip to the Seattle Aquarium unless we stopped by the octopus tank. This one's just kind of chilling. See the suction cups right up against the glass there. There's an eye there. It's one of the favorite exhibits here at the aquarium. Very popular. And of course we don't want to leave out the jellyfish. They're just going around in circles. I do believe this is a full ring, goes underneath. You can walk into it and watch them go right overhead.
Gemma!
That's kind of a big one.